kind of out of the blue, it developed a little bit of stumble at idle. Idling really rough, and I had to raise the idle in park just so that when I put it in drive it wouldn't stall out on me. So now I think in park the idle's about 11 or 1200, and in drive it drops down about 500 RPM. Alright, so I've got the rocker cover off and I've got the first 4 rocker arms removed, and what that did was that closed the intake valve, the exhaust valve for the number 1 cylinder, and the intake valve and the exhaust valve for the number 2 cylinders. So those are the 2 cylinders that I have zero compression on, and now all 4 of those valves are closed. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to install that in the number 1 spark plug hole. And what this is, it's a spark plug that I hollowed out and then cut and welded it to a fitting for compressed air. Okay, so I think you can see what's happening there. I'm blowing compressed air into the number 1 cylinder, and it's coming right out the number 2 cylinder spark plug hole. So air's going in the number 1 spark plug hole, coming right out the number 2 spark plug hole. That shouldn't happen, but it explains why I've got zero compression on 2 cylinders. It's because I've got a blown head gasket. It's blown right between the 2 cylinders, 1 and 2. So there's no water leak, there's no coolant leaking into the engine. I've got clean oil, I don't have milky oil, there's no water going into the oil, there's no compression going into the radiator. It's just a matter of blown right between the 2 cylinders where they're right next to each other, and the number 1 doesn't have any compression because when both the intake and exhaust valve are closed for the number 1 compression stroke, the one of the valves is going to be open on number 2, so all the compression is going right out at number 2. And then when number 2 goes up for compression stroke and it's got both of its valves closed, it doesn't matter because all the compression is going to go right into the number 1 cylinder that has at least one of its valves open. So I need to change the head gasket. That simple. So there's no point doing a wet compression test. Once you've got adjacent zeros like that, it's almost certainly a head gasket, and that's how you check that. Yesterday I worked on this for a few hours, and here's what I got done. I was able to pull the export brace that ties in the 2 shock towers there and connects to the back there, and that gave me some more room. I pulled the intake manifold off. You see right here I've got 2 studs to align the intake manifold when I put it back on, and that helps to align the valley pan gasket and the intake manifold as I drop that down on there. I didn't remove the exhaust manifold or the starter or the intermediate pipe between the exhaust manifold and the exhaust pipe down below. That's where my header used to hook up to the 1 exhaust pipe on the one side there, and all I did was I didn't have to jack up the car. I just got down there and I was able to get all 3 of those bolts really easily, and nuts, and there's just this metal, aluminum soft gasket down there with no RTD. So I dropped that out, and with that out of the way I was able to lift the cylinder head up and out of the engine bay, although it was heavy, with the exhaust manifold and intermediate pipe still installed, so that saved some time. And here's what I ended up with. Intake manifold there, I just left the carburetor bolted on. Aluminum intake with the carburetor with the air cleaner, that weighs 40 pounds, so that wasn't too bad to lift off of there. But the cylinder head with the exhaust manifold and the intermediate pipe still on there, that was 80 pounds. And I know that this assembly is 80 pounds and this assembly is 40 pounds because I weighed myself and then I weighed the 2 assemblies as I was holding on to them, and I got the weight difference that way. But what we're talking about is a blown head gasket, and that's what I've got. Obviously down here that's number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4 cylinders. And right there you can see here's what it's supposed to look like, and right here it's just completely blown, and that's what I was expecting to see when I those rings just completely, those metal rings in the head gasket completely blown out like that. You know, because when I put compressed air in the number 1 spark plug hole, the air shot right out of the number 2. So the air came in here and shot right out here, and that's because there was no seal right there. Amazingly, it ran decent on the highway, and the fuel economy wasn't terrible. It just had a rough idle, and I was absolutely just running on 6 cylinders. I got the oil filter out, and I've got new oil to put in once it's all back together, because when you pull a head gasket, even after you drain your radiator, you're going to get some water that spills over when you break that seal, break that head gasket. You don't want any water in your oil, so I'm still draining all the oil out of it. So I got the head torqued on there with a new head gasket. No RTV on head gasket. The intake manifold's on there, and that's all torqued down. That's done. I've got the fast idle kicker on there. The throttle's on there. The passing gear arm is attached. Vacuum advance is hooked up. Fuel hose is hooked up. Heater hose is hooked up. The oil dipstick is sitting in place where it goes, and not much left to do really. The only thing left now is bolt the transmission fill tube, which is back there. That gets bolted to the head, just like the oil dipstick is bolted to the head. And rocker arms, adjust the valves, put the alternator rack on there, put the battery back. The alternator sitting where the battery goes, put the battery back in there. Valve cover's got to go on. Distributor cap and wires and the export brace, and I think that's about it. When you got a cramped engine bay like this one with that 351 Cleveland right next to the shock tower right there, an easy way to get to the hard to reach spark plugs, just to get them started, is to jam the spark plug into some 5/16 fuel hose, and then that's nice and tight there, won't fall out. You got something to hold on to, like a little extension there. And just get it kind of close and start twisting it till it starts. And that's started right there. So now you just run it down until it's finger tight, and then once the spark plug is finger tight in the hole, then the fuel hose will just twist right off of it. And there's that. And then the right setup to torque the spark plug is essential. On this 70 Mustang with the Cleveland, 351 Cleveland, a half-inch drive ratchet and a half-inch to 3/8 adapter, and then a 5/8 socket. And when you don't need the torque of a half-inch drive ratchet, it's just that a deep well's not long enough and an extension makes it too long, so you basically just need that length. And then for this one, put the socket on there first, and then bring the ratchet down to it, just like that, and click, click, that one's done. Almost done, just about out of parts. All that's left to install from the box of stuff that I took off is this throttle return spring and the exhaust collector gasket down there. So it wasn't too bad. That cylinder head with the exhaust manifold and intermediate pipe still attached was 80 pounds, like I said earlier, and that was heavy getting out. But going back in was pretty easy because I had gravity to help me. Might not have been a bad idea to use an engine hoist, just because it's 80 pounds. It's kind of heavy, a little bit hard on the back. Next time I do that with the exhaust manifold attached, I might just use the engine hoist and get it out of there a little bit easier. The distributor never came out, so I don't have to worry about setting the timing. That's easy. I just need to hook up the exhaust, throw that throttle return spring on there, and put 5 quarts of oil and fill the radiator with coolant, and I'll be ready to go. It's running a lot better now. I got idle right there about 800 in park. come back to drive, and it jumped down to about 650. So that's much better than the drop I was getting before. Running good now. This is my first time taking it out on the highway.